Good evening and welcome. I am Sister Barbara Reed, President of Catholic Theological Union, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's program, the second in our series, Seeking Convivencia, at the intersections of Islam and Latinidad, yesterday and today. For those of you who may be new to CTU, we were founded in 1968 in the wake of the Second Vatican Council, which issued the groundbreaking document Nostra Aetate, the Declaration on the Relation of the Church with non-Christian religions. Since our founding, CTU has been very committed to interreligious dialogue, especially through the Catholic Jewish Studies and Catholic Muslim Studies programs. CTU has also been in the vanguard with our Hispanic Theology and Ministry program, preparing effective ministers for a church that is approaching majority Latinx. Tonight's groundbreaking program, featuring collaboration between our Catholic Muslim Studies program and our Hispanic Theology and Ministry program, models our commitment to be interreligious and intercultural. In this second part of the Seeking Convivencia series, which brings together scholars and practitioners, Muslims and Christians, we are delighted to welcome our two guest presenters, Dr. Zeyneb Sayilgan and Marta Felicitas Galedary. We are excited to see in our audience, once again, Muslims and Christians from across the USA and other parts of the world, including a number of our CTU students and graduates, as together we participate in this experience of lived interreligious dialogue. We hope that you will continue to join us for these critical interreligious and intercultural conversations as we seek for greater mutual understanding in our efforts toward building peace in our fractured world. And now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Saeed Atif Rizwan, Assistant Professor of Islamic and Interreligious Studies and Director of the Catholic Muslim Studies Program at Catholic Theological Union. Saeed?
I begin in the name of God, the more compassionate, the more merciful. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Greetings of peace and blessings. Saludos de paz. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Barbara, for your remarks and for your support. Buenas noches. Good evening, everyone. As Barbara mentioned, my name is Saeed Atif Rizwan, and I'm Assistant Professor of Islamic and Interreligious Studies and Director of the Catholic Muslim Studies Program here at Catholic Theological Union. The Catholic Muslim Studies Program was founded in 2000 with the intention of promoting mutual understanding, reconciliation, and cooperation between Muslims and Christians in order to advance justice and compassion in the human family. Through the CMSP, we offer public programming on interreligious dialogue, such as this evening's program, courses on Islam, as well as in relation to Christianity. And importantly, we recruit and provide full tuition scholarships for Muslim students who enroll here at CTU. I would like to welcome you, along with my co-host, Dr. Carmen Fernandez, to the second installment of the two-part series, Seeking Convivencia, at the intersections of Islam and Latinidad, yesterday and today. With the permission of God Almighty, inshallah, ohala, our esteemed panelists center their conversations around the different ways in which interreligious dialogue can be conceived of and looks like on the ground. This discussion stands as a continuation of the conversation we had in the fall with Dr. Harold Morales and Dr. Jean-Pierre Ruiz about the historical and modern social and theological intersections of Latinidad and Islam. As Dr. Nanco Fernandez noted during our fall event, you can't sweeten your cafecito con azúcar or get some sleep on your almohada or even invoke God's will, ojalá, without retrieving an Arabic linguistic tradition. Tonight, We want to understand and learn from how the Arabic linguistic tradition, as an extension of the Islamic tradition, expresses itself in everyday life. The structure of the program is as follows. We will have 4 focused questions with responses and conversations between our guests lasting about 10 minutes per question. Each question will be introduced with the framing slide. Following the conversation, we will then field questions from the audience for about 15 to 20 minutes. Please send your questions through the chat feature to the co-host, which is me and Dr. Nanco Fernandez. Please note that all audience microphones will be muted throughout the program. During the Q&A, the co-host will share your questions and comments with our guest panelists. We strongly encourage you to submit questions to us anytime through the 4 conversations for discussion in the Q&A. Now, having provided the layout of the program, I will turn it over to my dear colleague, Dr. Carmen Nanco Fernandez, to introduce herself and the panelists. Carmen?
Gracias, Sayid. Buenas noches, buenas tardes, o buenos días, depending on your time zone. Soy Carmen Nanco Fernandez, professor of Hispanic Theology and Ministry and director of the Hispanic Theology and Ministry program at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. For 40 years, CTU has educated students, ministers, scholars, the church, and the greater community through our Hispanic Theology and Ministry program. Offering public events such as this, courses, and academic credentialing through our degrees and a certificate, HTMP draws on a rich history of theological wisdom, pastoral agency, religious expressions, and diverse experiences arising from nuestra Latinidad. We invite you to consider studying with us and to take advantage of our various degrees, programs, and available scholarship monies. Seeking Convivencia is our historic first co-sponsored program accomplished en conjunto with our CTU Catholic Muslim Studies program. For this second session, Interreligious Dialogue as Lived Practice, we are privileged to have with us Zeyneb, Sayilgan, and Marta, Felicitas, Galedary. Zeyneb Sayilgan is the Muslim scholar on the academic and program staff of the Institute for Islamic, Christian, and Jewish Studies in Baltimore, Maryland. Professor Sayilgan has rich experience accompanying students in predominantly higher Christian educational contexts. She is an affiliated member at Virginia Theological Seminary, has taught at the Catholic University of America and at Georgetown University, where she also served as a residential chaplain for students from all backgrounds. Her scholarship and commitments are informed by her personal experience with religious diversity and Muslim immigration. Among the volumes she has co-edited is Faithful Neighbors, Christian Muslim Vision and Practice with Morehouse Publishing in 2016. Marta Khadija Felicitas Galedary founded la Asociación Latino-Musulmana de América, LALMA, in Los Angeles, California, over 20 years ago. LALMA has provided spiritual support, services, and Spanish language resources for Latino y Latina Muslims and advocated for social justice according to Islamic values. Galedary has been instrumental in promoting interreligious relationships through her efforts with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, Loyola Marymount University, and LA Voice, among others. In 2003, she was the US representative at the first Latin American Muslim Conference in Spain, sponsored by the United States State Department. Galedary is a registered nurse and is also a katiba, a prayer leader at the Women's Mosque of America, the first woman-led Muslim house of worship in the United States. And now, to frame this evening's conversation. For almost 40 years, the Catholic Church has articulated an understanding of interreligious dialogue in terms of 4 forms or movements, identified as the dialogue of life, where people strive to live as respectful neighbors, sharing in the ordinariness of life with its joys, sorrows, troubles, and celebrations. The dialogue of action, where people of goodwill and of varying religious traditions and communities collaborate for the integral development and liberation of people, and they labor together for causes of justice. The dialogue of theological exchange, where theologians, scholars, and leaders strive to deepen their understanding of their respective religious heritages and to appreciate each other's spiritual values and heritages in attempts to move forward together. The dialogue of religious experience, where persons rooted in their own religious traditions share with each other their spiritual riches, wisdom, practices, and experiences of the holy. To guide our conversation, we turn to this helpful framework, familiar to many Catholics globally, as well as to many of our partners who have engaged in lived interreligious dialogue at every level, from the Vatican to the grassroots, and from varied faith and religious traditions and positions of goodwill. Just a reminder, please send your questions and comments to the co-hosts, Saeed or myself, Carmen, at any point during these 4 conversations. We will gather your questions and they will form our conversation as part of the question and answer session after the 4 conversations. And so now, together, let us move to question 1. The dialogue of life. People share their religious ways of being and knowing in the ordinariness of their daily lives, at work, at school, at home, in the neighborhood, even within our very own families. Marta, Zeyneb, when you consider interreligious dialogue from each of your respective perspectives as a dialogue of life, how do you actually do it at this most basic level in ways that cultivate healthy and caring interpersonal relations? Do you have any practical tips or stories that you can share with all of us from your own lived experiences?
Thank you. I think I'm going first. Okay. Peace and blessings to all. Assalamualaikum. Paz y bendiciones a todos ustedes. Before I respond the questions, let me let you know that I am immigrant to this country. My primary language is Spanish. I was raised in a Catholic family. I am the 10th daughter. So I'm the last daughter in this family. One of my sisters became a nun. And also my moral values, care and loving for others were rooted in my family. So fast forward, after my declaration of faith or Shahada, which I gave my declaration in a mosque, immediately somebody came to me and gave me a present. It was a South Asian outfit, which I thought it was beautiful and was very handy because I didn't know what to wear. How I'm supposed to wear when I go to the mosque. So I where on a Friday, and I'm going out of my apartment, and immediately my neighbor, who is a Mexican, I'm surrounded with Mexican and other Latino countries, Latin American countries. When my neighbor saw me, his reaction was, why you are wearing that way? That is not your culture. And basically it shook me because I never intended to change my culture. You know, I was just wearing something in an innocent way to go to the mosque, and why it should be seen like I'm changing my culture. That was not my intention when I told him. But obviously that made me think, okay, my appearance will give the signal that I am changing my culture. So later on, and with the time pass, I realized by reading that there's no uniform for a woman. The only uniform for a woman, Muslim woman, is modesty. So that was my interaction with my neighborhood. But now I moved to another neighborhood where there's not really an interaction of interfaith dialogue, but we interact with actions, how we share, we walk together twice a week. So that is an interaction of action among my neighbors. We take care of each other. But then there was a major situation that I needed to face. Tell my mother that I embrace Islam and how she will react to my confession to her. So I called and I tried to explain to her, but the word Islam is completely unknown in Mexico in 1987. So she thought I joined a cult and probably something kind of not good. So she expressed her concern to the local priest, the priest from the town where I grew up. And the priest told my mother, do not worry about your daughter. She's practicing an ancient religion. God bless this priest, because with those words, my mother had peace of mind. So when I came to visit, no problem. I was treated differently because no pork served to me or my husband when my husband and I visited. But there was another interesting conversation, and it was my non-sister. My non-sister was older than I. She blamed herself. She thought that because she didn't talk to me about the Bible, I found something else. But my response was, no, don't worry. I didn't change the religion. I still love Jesus. We love Jesus. Muslims believe in Jesus, believe on his miracles, believe on the miracles way of his birth, virgin birth. And the only thing I do differently is I pray more, 5 times a day, and I fast more. But I'm the same. I love you all. I didn't change my culture. And that's how I integrated my Islam to my family. And the tip here will be, do not argue with the people of the book. And the people of the book are the Christians and Jews. But also in this case, because my family, never argue with my family on matters of religion. So till now, we have a wonderful and relationship. We love each other and no problem with that issue of religion. The other I wanted to point out that the way we kept our relationship with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles and through the young adult ministry, where Alberto Embry is still the director of this program. Thank you, Alberto. We celebrate Ramadan every year until 2019, before the pandemic. And at that time, it was beautiful. Every year since probably 2000, what was that? Alberto, maybe 2008 till 19. Every year we have a program with them. And every year we wanted to make it different, right? So the youth ministry group will observe how we break fast, to observe the after sunset prayer, and the most important part, we share a delicious meal. So we enjoy the food. We didn't ask for Mexican food. No, we have a Persian food, which is delicious. and then everyone, we made a raffle and everybody went home happy with a present. So
Marta, thank you so much. You know, I would ask for mole. That's what I would do, but that's
yes.
just me.
Thank you.
Why don't we bring in Zeyneb and let her offer some reflections as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to be part of this forum. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So I'm very grateful, Dr. Carmen and Dr. Said, for having me tonight. And thank you all for joining us and for the gift of your time and your presence. So I mean, what better way to, engage with people than over a meal and fellowship? But I always love to go back to the basics. I think the foundations in our that are, anchored in both of our faith traditions. And I think, for me, the Christian tradition affirms that every human being is created in the image of God, and certainly Islam stresses the sanctity of all human life. So for me, that is sufficient to engage with every human being, right? Like really going to the basics and in honoring every human being and serving every human being, I actually honor and serve God. So for me, it means to a commitment to cultivate relationships as much as I can in the spaces where I show up, whether at work, at school, or in my neighborhood, or in any setting that I found myself, to really make that a consistent commitment, and to create a safe and welcoming aura and space so that people feel welcomed and embraced, and where I can display the compassion that I think is key in my own faith tradition. So I think just like this foundation helps me to always keep things in perspective. And I just want to give some practical examples. 2 years ago, I moved into a new district, and I was pleasantly surprised to find out that the schools were off on the Eid holidays, on one of the major Eid holidays. Muslims, as you know, have two major holidays. And not only that, it was off on the Eid holiday, but the school calendar accommodated all other holidays of the communities that lived in the district. So we have, school is off on the days where, the Hindu community celebrates Diwali or Hanukkah. And at first, of course, I have to admit, I was a bit puzzled because I had to scramble for childcare because school was off. But I think it invited all of us collectively as a community to slow down and pause and think, why is this so significant? Why is this holiday, this religious holiday, or this holiday, the Lunar New Year recently, so significant for this community. And then, you know, in my case, my family and I, we ventured out into the library, and with my kids, we checked out the libraries that, the books that were on display. So it was an invitation to learn about the other, to get smarter about religious diversity and cultural diversity. So I think this is a wonderful, I think, example how a school district was trying to accommodate religious diversity or cultural diversity, and in that process also invites you know, the other members in that community to learn about the other people, right? And so I think that was for me a huge benefit. And I think even though I'm, you know, I myself Muslim, I want to, I think, as a mom of 2 young children, I want other children also to have the opportunity to celebrate the holidays and be comfortable and, you know, enjoy their time with families. And we sometimes, especially those of us who are very familiar with the Christian calendar, we take it for granted. But there are many people who don't have that kind of, you know, blessing. And maybe even in that regard, you know, when we you know, go to schools, our children go to school, to advocate and be an ally, you know, show solidarity and try to, as much as we can, to advocate for others so that they also have, you know, that ability to celebrate those special days. So that's what was one example, I think, that is very practical, but it brings up the whole idea of religious diversity on the radar of people, and it's also really allows for learning, collective learning as a community, and how we in America with such huge diversity, it's actually a privilege to learn about so many different communities and cultures and religions. That's one thing. And then also, of course, in my own neighborhood, when I moved in here, I was the only Muslim in the neighborhood, and I felt like, okay, the burden is on me to, you know, reach out and make sure the neighbors get to know me. And I think there is what sociologists call the third space, that especially our homes sometimes serve as a third space where we can invite people to get to know, you know, ourselves better and on a more intimate level, in a very, you know, it's our private space, but it's all, our home is our sanctuary. So what I did, I invited my neighbors over for a cup of tea and coffee, get to know me, who, you know, there's a Muslim in your neighborhood, and I'm sure you might have some questions or some reservations. And I felt that was a way to bring people together, to learn about each other. So each of us, I think, where we show up in the neighborhood, at school, in the hospital, for example, I was a patient in the hospital twice, and I went through the system, and some of the things that I recognized, you know, in terms of religious accommodation, you know, Islamic dietary needs or cultural sensibilities, you know, filled out the survey, you know, talk to the chaplain there. So there are always ways where we can think of how can we educate others more about cultural and religious, you know, sensibilities and diversity, and to be, I think, also an ally for other communities and an advocate. I think I think is important. And just like Marta, I came to this country as an immigrant, and we naturally, of course, have very interesting experience. We embody this whole dialogue of life, because once you are, as a Muslim in a non-majority Muslim country, then of course questions arise, and you're trying to navigate and all of that. So I think the school system is a perfect example, and there are also other spaces where we can where we can facilitate learning.
Thank you, Zeynep. I hope with that tea you also offer some Turkish coffee. And as you can tell, the theme for me is always about food.
Absolutely.
But moving to our second question, interreligious dialogue as a dialogue of action is familiar to each of you in light of the work each of you has done. For example, on issues of immigration and social justice. Marta, you have organized many initiatives on a grassroots level. How does Islam inform your vocation and action in these areas? What concrete examples come to your mind that can help to illustrate what is possible when faith and religious communities come together, especially on issues of justice?
Thank you. Well, to start with, in Islam, we are commanded to advocate on behalf of the underserved communities. As we learn, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was himself a refugee when he was forced to leave his birthplace, Mecca, to Medina. But besides the command that is in the Quran, I possess the sensitivity for the underserved community. I feel it. And this sensitivity and the command from God took me to where I am now, like an activist. They call me activist, but in other words, I advocate for the underserved. And it happens that in 2014, I came across with a community organizer who was already working for LA Boys. LA Boys is a grassroots organization that is formed by multiple faith congregations. Also, when I attended the first meeting, they read the credentials of LA Boys, and I definitely embrace the purpose of LA Boys, which was protect human rights, defend social justice, human dignity, and the well-being of the community, regardless of the race and religious affiliation. And I said to myself, this is what we want. This is what we need, because the needs of our small Latino Muslim community intertwine with the needs of the other communities in Los Angeles. So I realized that we couldn't succeed alone in trying to meet their needs. So therefore, we immediately said, we're going to join you and we're going to become an active member of LA Boys. So we attended several trainings, and immediately in the same year, 2014, after we received training on canvassing, and for those that don't live in this country, canvassing is knocking the doors and doing phone banking. We found ourselves in the South Central area of Los Angeles, which is predominantly African-American and Latino. So you will have in one block living side by side these two communities. So we collaborated with the African-American Muslims, and we embarked in this wonderful experience. It was wonderful. It was the first time we ever done this, and it was a successful canvassing. We enjoy, and yes, we promoted the proposition or initiative 47, which when it was in the ballot, and after all the information that everyone was promoting, this proposition was approved and voted for the majority of Californians. Another interesting activity that we did, and this is regarding the increasing ICE rates. What is ICE? The immigration customs enforcement. And people in Chicago knows how these rates, ICE rates, provoke a fear, panic, and the community. Can you imagine? We felt that anguish just in the fear when parents were taking the kids and the parent will not return home. So what happens at that time, the coalition, LA Boys, and all the members form a rapid response team. And the purpose of this team was to gain time so that the person who has been detained did not get deportation, so that an attorney immediately went and helped this person. So also the population, the community needed information, what to do in case ICE, in case immigration comes and knock at your door, what are you gonna do? So we gave workshops on know your rights. Step by step, everybody learned what are you gonna do, what you're not gonna do, and don't run away, don't run. So that was very informative and to the community. Also, in 2014, the California state proposed to give driving license to the undocumented community. So we approved, we passed, and then 2015, the first driver's license tests were given. And guess what? It was given using computer, and our community didn't know anything about computers. So we teach them. We did workshops and taught them very simple. This is where you're going to press. And also we review so many questions and answers from the driver's license test. So that was awesome. Everybody was so grateful, and they would come back, I passed the test. So it was just so rewarding. In 2016, we really did a major workshop on citizenship. We gathered students from the University of Southern California, volunteers, the Alma volunteers, Loyola Marymount law students, and we all together help, especially Latinos, to file for citizenship. There's so many residents that are right now ready for citizenship, but because they have to pay money maybe to have their attorney to review their documents, we offered this workshop, and it was wonderful. It was a successful event. And also during COVID-19, we really were tested. Most of our members in LALMA lost their jobs. We found our brothers and sisters, single mothers with children with no job. They would come to us and say, what are we going to do? We didn't have not even food, or how are they going to pay the rent? So we mobilized the Muslim community. We request donations, and also LA Boys gave us a grant money. So we help our own community to pay the rent. We gave them money until they were able to get back to their job. It was also very difficult, but we solved the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marta, for the many concrete examples of social action and of communities in action for together in order to pursue justice for their own communities, as well as in conjunto with those that they accompany in life. We'd like to move things now to the third dialogue, which is, as you may know, the dialogue of theological exchange. And at this point, what we'd like to do is the interreligious dialogue, as a dialogue of theological exchange, requires the engagement of theologians and scholars who know their traditions and their communities very deeply and very well. But there must also be an openness and a willingness to engage others from other religious traditions as well as positions of goodwill. Zeyneb, you have spent much of your professional career in theological education as a professor in predominantly Christian schools and as a Muslim specialist in an interreligious collective. How do you understand your role in these contexts? What is it that you would want your Christian sisters and brothers to know? And what fruits have you seen come from these theological exchanges, especially those that you've been a part of? And what kinds of obstacles have you observed or experienced in the dialogue of theological exchange?
Yeah, thank you, Carmen. That's a great question. You know, I really, again, growing up in Germany as a Muslim, I came to this work primarily because I couldn't recognize in the negative statements and depictions of Islam the beauty that I have experienced throughout my life. I mean, the beauty of my own tradition. And so I very early on, since I was a middle school student, embodied this adventure of interreligious dialogue, you know, constantly facing questions, and realized very quickly that there were lots of misunderstandings and stereotypes and misperceptions in both communities, you know. So I kind of embodied the conversation of the sacred and the secular, but also the Muslim and the non-Muslim. And I always found myself, you know, within myself, always being in dialogue. So I really came to see me as a kind of bridge builder, I would say, who is helping, who really loves to be in the classroom with people of faith, who you know, primarily Christians who don't belong to my faith tradition, but where I learned personally so much. So I think that one of the beautiful things about theological exchange, I think about dialogue in general, is that you are engaging in a dialogue with yourself. You get to actually know yourself better. You're deep in your own religious beliefs, and you become a more self-conscious, self-critical, self-aware believer. And I think in that process that really I came to embrace theological exchanges and also the whole interreligious dialogue as well. I think in the Christian seminary setting for the past 6 years, where I've taught at the Christian seminary and I still teach, I see that Christian students, seminarians, they deep down feel that a lot of stuff that is, you know, shown in the media is a very distorted version of Islam, but they miss the knowledge base and the resources, right? Resources to challenge those perceptions. So I had, for example, one student coming to me and say, you know, in my family, there's a lot of hostile speech towards Muslims. And I know in my heart that a large human community population cannot be simply evil, right? Because human beings are complex beings and multifaceted. But he never had enough knowledge to like challenge those views. So I think in that regard, you know, when you are in a seminary setting, the Christian students who will become clergy, who will become chaplains and seeking, you know, alternative ministries, whether as chaplains in hospitals or prisons or at school or university campuses, they serve a diverse student body or a diverse population. They want to be equipped to care for the whole creation, right? And so I had Christian seminarians who felt ill-equipped when they went into a hospital setting and served Muslim patients. How do I do this? How do I approach a Muslim patient, caring for them holistically, acknowledging their spiritual and religious needs, right? And many Muslim patients reached out to Christian chaplains and clergy and asked for resources for help. And so I think sometimes there is a disconnect, especially when you look at the CPE program, that, you know, when a lot of seminarians go into the clinical pastoral education in the summer, the people in the hospital think they will, you know, they get the stuff taught in the seminary, and in the seminary the assumption is that they will get the skills taught in a hospital, so, or in that institution. So there's that disconnect. I think we cannot afford any longer to not equip ourselves as religious leaders, as those who serve a diverse population, not to know about the other, right? Because as human beings, as I said, there are spiritual needs, religious needs, and I served as a residential chaplain to a diverse student body, and the same thing, right? So you have students who are in need of spiritual guidance or religious guidance, or have mental needs, emotional needs, and just to have the skills and the knowledge, I think, is key. So for me, as a Muslim scholar, I think it is to help point to these resources, to equip people with the basic knowledge skills and the awareness for the cultural and religious sensitivities. And I think if we can do that, then I consider it a very successful teaching moment. And in return, I'm mutually enriched, because I can go back to my community and say, this is how Christians are perceiving us, or this is where we are lacking and what we are missing. And so I also take that back to my community. So there's a lot of mutual learning happening.
Do you find any obstacles that because it's important for
Yeah.
Christians to know where sometimes we can be an obstacle to the furthering of our relationships?
Yeah, I think one obstacle that comes to my mind is sometimes there's the anxiety that I don't know enough to engage in interreligious dialogue. I need to be an expert in my tradition to like engage with the other and explain the Trinity in 2 seconds, right? That makes sense to a Muslim. But no, you don't. You don't have to have your ideas fully formed. And I think to humbly acknowledge that, right, that we are growing in the process, right? And I think a lot of times I hear clergy saying, our congregation does not know enough about their own faith. How can they engage with Muslims? And I would say a lot of social data that is out there is, supporting this, that we are actually deepening our own faith, our own theology, as we are learning about the other, right? So because we go back and say, okay, this person has raised this question, I've never thought about this, I was just taking this for granted, and now I really have to look deeper. And this is how it's really played out for me, that I had to constantly face the question, am I Muslim because my parents are Muslim, or am I Muslim because this is based on conviction and knowledge and certainty? And so, which again in the process makes you a more self-critical, self-conscious person of faith. So I think all around there's always mutual benefit. And obstacles, I think one obstacle that I've faced in the past, sometimes again because of the negative perception on Islam and Muslims that is out there, is, why is a Muslim hired as a faculty? And I think we, there is value in learning about Islam from a Christian professor, but there's also value for learning from a person like Dr. Said, who is Muslim, who is within the tradition, but also, can provide that authentic personal experience. And so to see that value and not think, okay, this, as a Muslim faculty, you cannot teach Islam objectively or critically enough. I think there is sometimes this bias that as a devout practitioner of your faith, you cannot be a critical academic. And so that's sometimes, I think, the obstacle that is out there, which I think, I personally don't think that, holds true. I can perfectly be an insider, but also, step outside my tradition and say, okay, this is how this might be perceived from your vantage point, and this is how I would respond to this. That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot to talk about. Just given some of the parallels between your own experiences and mine, Dr. Zeyneb. So I really appreciate that. So. But before getting into the Q&As, one more framing question for both of you. And this one, the focus is on interreligious dialogue as a dialogue of religious experience. And this returns our attention back to daily lived experiences of the holy and the sacred, as well as our expressions of faith. So from each of your perspectives, what would you be comfortable sharing with others as practices, as wisdom, prayers, or insights that sustain you, that nurture you, that can nurture our relationships, and that can help us to understand one another across diverse faiths and religious traditions.
Okay. I'll share my experience on that question. And everything is related to our forming and joining LA Voice because of the multiple congregations that LA Voice has as members, and the interaction with all faiths. My exposure, my view of other faiths was enriched tremendously. And how that happened? Well, first, we build friendship by volunteering, working side by side, by the Jewish community, evangelical community, Catholics, Mennonites. We get to know each other, and especially during the trainings. The trainings given by LA Voice took place in the houses of worship. So we went to different churches, we went to synagogues, and of course, we invited them to a mosque. So in a synagogue, I went to the experience in observing a Sabbath and Passover in a synagogue. I attended Mass with the Catholics of the Lord's Mission, and this is so beautiful. During a training in a synagogue, we were asked, Lalma was going to be in charge of organizing a Friday prayer, Juma prayer in a synagogue. And we couldn't believe it, but yes, oh my goodness, we are going to share with everyone how Muslims do the Friday prayer. So we invited a imam, a Mexican-American imam. He came, he gave the sermon, and the attendees, which were all this group of multiple faith organizations, they listened to the sermon and they prayed with us. So all of them were following the movements of the prayer, and it was just amazing. It really went to my heart to feel the support, not only morally, the respect that they had for our faith, for Latino Muslims, all together, sharing and praying to the same God. So I really enrich my knowledge, my experience in different ways of worshiping the same God. And of course, I did, it confirmed for me a passage in the Quran, right? That God has sent to everyone a law and a way of life. If God had so willed it, we could have been made and shared the same religion, but he willed it otherwise in order that God was going to test us and what he gave us. Right. So yes, there is pluralism. We accept it and do not argue about it. Do not try to prove that you had the right or the truth, because at the end, God will make us understand who is right and who is wrong, but compete in doing good deeds. So when I understand this earlier in my Islam learning, I said, yes, this is what it is. And we are sharing all together different ways of praising God. So that's my take on this spiritual enrichment that I experience.
Thank you. Zeynep?
I can only continue on Marta's thread. I have here my Quran, right? And so it's for me, again, my sacred object. And now it's interesting that you're asking about the dialogue of religious experience, because we just recently launched here at the Institute an interreligious spirituality group where we come together monthly, and the people from different faith and no faith in the group, and who share about their spiritual experiences. Who are your spiritual heroes, right? So people come share about spiritual heroes like Oscar Romero or Dorothy Day, or their grandmother, their grandfather, right? And so some things you cannot learn from a textbook. So there is something that then the Catholic Church classified as the dialogue of religious experience. And when I brought this to my dear colleague, our Roman Catholic scholar, she said, yes, we have that in the Catholic tradition, right? The dialogue of religious experience. And I was so excited because I said, Heather, we need to have dialogue that goes deeper and not just about the theology, yes, but what do you feel when you pray or when you recite scripture, or what's going on when you read the Gospel of Luke during Christmas? And so that was a very rich and very different type of dialogue. And I also wanted to leave you with two passages that inspire me personally in my interreligious engagement that I think follow nicely to what Marta said. And it's again, a very familiar passage from the Quran that is from chapter 49. Dr. Said knows that already, but I wanted to share it with you again, which I think inspires me in my work. So the passage states, "O humankind, we, God, has created you from a male and a female and made you into races and tribes so that you may know one another. Surely the noblest of you in God's sight is the one who is most pious of you. Indeed, God is all-knowing, all-aware." And then in the other passage from chapter 30 of the Quran states, "And among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the difference of your languages and colors. Indeed, in this there are signs for those who know." So I think for me, this whole idea that difference and diversity and pluralism is a divinely willed project is truly inspiring, and it is to honor it and see it as a strength and not as an obstacle. And as Marta said, it is to know one another and compete in good actions and not see each other as competitors in a bad way, but rather how do we create faith alliances that work for the common good. And for me, it's deeply empowering to read these passages that show me not to feel threatened by difference, as long as I think we are rooted in our faith tradition and not give up on the integrity and the principles of our traditions. I think we can engage and we can collaborate and cooperate. So I think that I think is a very important point. Sometimes we have this idea when we enter into dialogue, we have to give up on the foundations of our faith commitments. I don't think that that is not authentic dialogue for me. I think this is the one where you are truly rooted in your own religious commitments, and out of that rootedness can embrace the other. So
thank you. One thing that I always share with my students is with the first verse from Surah Al-Hujurat, that to learn from one another. As you know, the Arabic is ta'arafu, and which is a verb that connotes both reciprocity and reflexiveness. So in other words, it's so that you can learn from one another, and so you can learn about yourself.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of these things that sometimes gets lost, and that I really appreciate both of you underscoring, is how dialogue also allows us to learn about ourselves, and not only our relationship with others, but our own relationship to God. And so I really appreciate you both talking a little bit about that in that way.
You're very welcome. Yeah, it's in the relationships that we fully form ourselves, our own personalities also, right? I mean, so.
That's right.
Thank you, Zeyneb and Marta. You have set us a rich and luxurious table for comida for thought as we ponder what it is to be in relationship at the level of lived practice of interreligious dialogue. And Zeyneb, thank you so much. That is one of the second passage that you read from the Quran is actually one of my favorites. And I have used it on other occasions too. And it's one of the best pieces of scripture that puts a face onto diversity and diversity as part of the divine gift. So I thank you for sharing that with everyone here. So speaking of divine gifts, we actually have some questions in the chat. And so we'd like to open up this part of our time together to engage with those who have patiently gathered this evening and this morning or this day, depending where they're from in the world. And we encourage you to please continue to send your questions to either Saeed or to Carmen, myself. And we will make sure that your questions are posed to all who are on the panel this evening. And the very first question comes from Kelly. And Kelly asks, you spoke about many different ways, Zeyneb, to share one's culture and even religious practice through schools, hospitals, neighborhoods, etc. From your perspective, what might be another ideal way, in your opinion, to invite others to share culturally and religiously in small venues, but especially in larger venues as well? And he wondered if you had, Kelly wondered if you had any thoughts about that at all.
Yeah, I think I'm always a big fan of small but consistent gatherings. So whatever you do, I think oftentimes in the interreligious dialogue landscape, we have one aha event and then nothing else. Like there is this, which is great, which is also good, but I think consistent, things like on a monthly or even bi-weekly basis, but where you come as a small group, and they are wonderful dialogue models and organizations. We have, for example, the Jewish Muslim model. Okay, now that excludes my Christian brothers and sisters, but the Daughters of Abraham, for example, that's a nationwide project that gathers in small groups, again, Jewish, Christian, Muslim women, and who have a book list. They have a website even, and they come together regularly. They actually invited me also to join, and they read books from every month from a different faith tradition that the people choose themselves, and they come together and then talk about it over a meal. And again, very basic, very simple idea, but it really creates these wonderful relationships. And especially there's something, that is with women coming together over, a great book, and that kind of sisterhood that then develops is so powerful. And again, as I said, there is something about inviting people into your personal space, because this is where you can truly be yourself and create that trust and intimate space. So I'm a big fan of inviting people to interfaith potlucks, and people come, and then we do a shared reading and then open it up for conversation. So again, I often hear from people that the large crowd, people don't really cultivate relationships. It's very informal. So I would suggest a group of, even 5-6 people to come regularly. And you can start in libraries. There are these organizations that you can join, and lots of great models out there to do these type of small but consistent gatherings that then build over time. We sometimes think that the quality lies in the big lecture crowd. I don't think so. I think it's where you can dive deep is really in the small gathering, and then local, staying local, I think is key, because you build that local network and relationship.
So Thank you so much. I'm going to combine, so we're getting a bunch of questions, and also I'll try to combine some that I can. So here, can you talk a little bit about the importance of listening when it comes to interreligious dialogue? How do people that are actually dialoguing, listening to one another, especially when it is listening to something that is setting differences and bringing it into sharp focus? It's a lot easier sometimes to listen to somebody that, is saying some things that resonate with you. But what about when someone is saying something that doesn't resonate with you, or maybe in contradiction to your own beliefs? So can you talk a little bit about what listening looks like for each of you, particularly when it comes to differences and being able to respect those differences in the relationships that you're establishing? Marta, would you like to start?
Okay. Yes. Okay. Listening. Actually, part of the trainings as we got with LA Voice is learn how to listen. And it's like even a technique, right? So it depends on the topic, but we're talking right now about interreligious listening. Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
Okay.
Interreligious dialogue. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So my experience is on the dialogue, usually, for instance, with a Loyola, they will tell the panelists like myself, this is the topic, and we present the topic. And basically, in this case, the audience would listen to me, right? And there's the questions, that's when the dialogue really happens. Now, on deeper dialogue, like theological dialogue, I really don't do it, right? Because of my scope of interaction. So yes, it is. But again, even in my limited scope of dialogue, in not a theological level, I do follow the like again, for me, like a rule from the Quran: do not argue. Right? Listen. Do not try to push your point. Right? Don't do that. Just tell, express, let the other person talk. And that way the dialogue can go smoothly. And if the other person is trying to impose himself or herself, it's like, I respect your opinion, but this is my own belief, my opinion. So I always lay on what the Quran says about do not argue with the people of the book.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that what your takeaway is that you're talking about dialoguing, not proselytizing. That's
right.
Not the purpose of that conversation.
Right.
Dr. Zeyneb.
Yeah, I think it's a key question, or like, I think always tell me more, I think is really helpful instead of answering, responding very quickly. I think the best dialogue is the one where when you're actively listening, and at some point you're saying, okay, I'm hearing you are saying this. Is this correct what I'm hearing? And then you just basically articulate back what your conversation partner has shared with you. And if they feel that they were heard correctly, then I will say, yes, this is, you heard me correct. If not, then you'll say, then please tell me more, clarify this point for me. Maybe I'm not hearing you right? So until you really are at a place where the dialogue partner feels that they're actually captured accurately, right? And I think this is an art, the art of active listening. And I'm still, I have to admit humbly that I'm a talker. I really have trouble actively listening. That's why I love to be in the front of the classroom. But I think we are learning the art of active listening, when we're like really being present and can summarize what the other has actually shared, and then not to discredit the experience and not to rush into like quick analogies. Sometimes we're like, oh, okay, you have the Bible, here's the Quran, that's just the same thing, okay, because we want to just focus on commonality so badly and build that relationship. We want to just pretend everything is the same, but there's a reason why I'm Muslim and you are Christian or you're Catholic, right? So and not to rush into these like quick assumptions and similarities, I think is key, because analogies might work to some level, but they also are deficient, and to be cautious that the Christian faith has something unique to offer, Islam has something unique to offer, and not to think that everything and everyone needs to be the same, and to really be keen for the differences and not to just wash them over, I think.
Thank you. That takes us to something that actually one of our audience members, Juan, has raised. And I think it builds off of this conversation about listening, because you're also bordering on the conversation of what's the relationship between listening and witnessing. And Juan words it this way. He says, it takes courage to talk about your own religion and opening up. Is the difference between interfaith dialogue and propagation, or even proselytization, all about intention, or is it even more? So in some areas, he's pushed us now to how do we witness?
The elephant in the room.
What's the relationship, and how does, even in our witness of our own faith, out of our faith traditions, we still can maintain the integrity to our faith, but yet be open to the voice of the mystery that is God. So
right. Just a word on proselytization. I think it's, again, the elephant in the room when you are in dialogue circles. And just to be clear, you can't avoid that. If somebody feels they are drawn to the other tradition and they want to engage and learn more, let it be, okay? As long as it's in a climate of mutual respect and mutual understanding and healthy reason and argumentation and discourse, why not? I think sometimes there's always this, because we have negative, of course, there's a negative weight in history with proselytizing and evangelism and all of that. But, there are people who are searching, right? There are people who might be interested in the spiritual treasures you have. And, as if it's their own free choice, let it be. But I think I'm not coming into a dialogue circle and saying, I'm going to convert you. As a Muslim, that's actually my tradition. It's not my job to convert people, because I believe faith comes through God's guidance, right? It's God's decision to guide to whichever path he wants people to be guided. So at least from a Muslim perspective, Muslim theological perspective, we can only embody our faith and try to be, again, witnesses of our faith traditions. And I think that's sufficient, right? Like just walk the talk, like embody and be a witness of God. I think share the beauty of your faith tradition in a way that is respectful and dignified, I think. But when it comes to force and compulsion, I think we can all agree that has no place there in a dialogue circle. I think, first of all, it's mutual learning. That would be the first step. But we should also not be hesitant in allowing people for their own personal searches and journeys. Because I had one person come up to me on a panel and said, I actually became Muslim because somebody was holding a brochure on the street, and I was very grateful for that, right? So would it be me sitting on the street and holding brochures? No, but for this person, he was grateful and he felt enriched, and I was happy for him. So it made me realize, everything has to be always approached in a healthy, balanced manner, and not to always throw out everything. But I think if we could be just witnesses, offer a shared witness of God in this world. Christians and Muslims make up half of the world's population, and we have a lot that we can share, instead of competing with each other on who has the most converts. I think that is a powerful witness of faith, and maybe to do it together and offer a lot of good things to the world that our spiritual treasures have, I think would be a wonderful step forward.
Really, really, really nice reflection. Thank you, Dr. Zeyneb. Yeah, I said in the earlier comments about the relationship between Latinidad and Islam, and Marta, being in Latino circles, can you talk a little bit about how some of the ways in which you counter Islamophobia, and ways in which you show how that in fact, even if somebody is Christian but is part of Latinidad, in many ways there's a deeper connection with Islam, and because of the cross-pollination, so to say, that has happened over the centuries. And then at a broader level, Dr. Zeyneb, if you can talk a little bit about, as Christians and as Muslims, we share a common father in Abraham. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. So can you talk a little bit about certain touchstones that you think can help to break down negative representations about Islam, or possibly vice versa? So why don't we start with Marta?
Okay, yeah, great question. Yes, Islamophobia really hit the Muslim community badly. And so the way that I personally handle, because everyone, I think, handled it differently, but the way I personally handled was, and this is happening even since the time when I was wearing my South Asian outfit, and which looks like a Pakistan or Indio-Pakistan outfit, right? So at that point, I realized that the way that everybody looked at me wearing that dress or wearing a dark gown, which is where in some of the Arab countries, will not give me my identity as a Latina. It will give me the identity of an Arab or somebody from South Asian country. Mm-hmm. I immediately thought, no, I'm not changing my culture. I'm Mexican. So I stopped wearing dresses that are not part of where I came from, and start wearing just my normal clothing with modesty. The veil obviously played a very important role. Just by looking me in the street with a veil, even though I'm dressed like in regular clothing, everybody will assume I am a Muslim. So during the Islamophobic, very bad peak of the situation, I did not wear the headscarf. And by not wearing the headscarf, it actually helped me. I was not announcing myself to everyone who I was, and make my interaction in the neighborhood, at work, and everywhere else free of this double prejudice. Prejudice is being Latina, Mexican, and now adding the veil as a Muslim, double. So that's the way I manage these situations. But when there is a dialogue, when there's an interaction with LA Voice and all the congregations, I have no problem wearing my headscarf. I have no problem going to the dialogue with the Catholic Youth Ministry or the Loyola. So I manage my situation and whatever who I'm going to be talking to. And that goes with the way that I learn about the verse from the Quran on the veil. But that is another
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marta. Yep, thank you so much, Dr. Zeyneb.
Yeah, I was thinking about Abraham as our Urvater or our Urfather. You know, sometimes in the West, we like to classify it as, you know, the Judeo-Christian heritage and the Judeo-Christian context. And so it's always sometimes this, the people say that in order to otherize or exclude the Muslims. But if you look at Abraham, Prophet Abraham, he had, you know, his sons, and so we, you know, the descendants of Ishmael, the Arabs, the Muslims, right? St. John of Damascus talked about the heresy of the Ishmaelites. So it's kind of, you still belong to the family, but you got it a little bit wrong kind of approach. I think for me, when we talk about our Abrahamic heritage, also points to our scriptural kinship, that we have a kinship, the Near Eastern kinship, that all of our traditions originated from the same Near Eastern context. And then out of that, you know, it's not the East and the West, but there was a lot of mutual exchange and borrowing and enrichment. You know, you talk St. Thomas Aquinas, who engaged with Islamic theology and philosophy, and, you know, through Spain to Europe, you know, even our graduation ceremony, it comes from the Islamic tradition of putting the abaya on the disciple and then giving the certificate. All of this actually comes from the Islamic tradition, right? So from all the Islamic rituals. So I think it's important to keep in mind that there are people who want to divide and be divisive. But when we look at the Abrahamic heritage and the Near Eastern context, we are actually sharing that sacred origin. And so looking into the Quran, which is deeply dialogical, always connecting the dots and saying, remember the previous revelations. I cannot be Muslim without affirming the prophets, without affirming Jesus, peace be upon him, without affirming Moses, peace be upon him. How can I then not be in dialogue with the followers of Prophet Moses and Jesus? How can I claim to love my Prophet Jesus or Prophet Moses when I'm not in dialogue with those who love them? So for me, it's a no-brainer and something that we need to bring back into the Muslim community and remind ourselves, what are the practical implications? It cannot be that we are simply engaging in dialogue because of Islamophobia, but because this is intrinsic to the Quranic universe, to the Quranic heritage, to who we are as Muslims, right?
Yeah, that is so important, that it is intrinsic as opposed to a countering type of a framework. So that makes a lot of sense. So there's a bunch more questions that have come through, but all good things must come to an end at a certain point. So we'll wrap up the Q&A, and, you know, we don't want to take up too much of our time, our panelists and of our audience, but we deeply appreciate it. So just as closing remarks, you know, through our two-part series, we have sought to learn about, as well as to model, coexistence, that is, Convivencia. Dr. Carmen Fernandez and I have tried to show different ways of doing interreligious dialogue that is nuanced and allows for authentic representations. We hope that our audiences will take note that interreligious dialogue is not just about conversations, but that it is also about who is actually doing the conversation. In the fall program, we had two amazing self-identifying Christians who spoke about the history of the intersection of Islam, Christianity, and Latinidad from the Iberian Peninsula to the Americas. This evening, we had two self-identifying Muslims who discussed the different ways in which Islam and Latinidad specifically and Muslim-Christian relations generally actually work on the ground. For their inspiring work and time, we thank Dr. Harold Morales, Dr. Jean-Pierre Ruiz, and tonight's guests, Dr. Zeyneb Sayilgan and Marta Galedary. On behalf of myself and Dr. Carmen Fernandez, we would also like to thank Commonweal Magazine, as well as those at CTU who helped make our programs a success. Peter Cunningham, the Associate Director of the Bernadine Center, Colleen Kennedy, Vice President for Institutional Advancement, Madison Chastain, Marketing and Communications Manager, and Jennifer Teal, our technology professional. Thank you all those who joined in our program this evening, perhaps early evening or perhaps late evening, or maybe morning, depending on where you're calling from in the world. With the sincerest peace and blessings of God Almighty, have a great evening.